I, He got fired from Kane, now we ain't got no shame. So we started a pod, took Yates into town.
So what's the origin of you joining Digital Wildcatters?
So this was kind of the story. So, I get fired.
And that was 20?
That was April of 20.
Okay.
20. It was post-COVID.
Yeah. All right. That's all right.
Yeah, I was like, Chuck, we need to get on a Zoom call. Okay. We need to let you go because of performance. I was like, I caused minus $37 oil. I mean, I'm glad to know I'm that powerful. But so got booted and then just kind of sat around in Richmond, Texas at home and didn't really do anything. And David DeRode and Josh Lowry, who were doing Oilfield 360, called me up and said, hey, you want to come on the podcast? And I'll actually put this picture up on the video version. I'll find it for you real quick. I mean, I hadn't shaved. And, I was just like, man, I don't have to shave anymore. I don't have a job. I'm not fundraising. And so I kind of did that, and I went and talked with them, and they said, here we go. Here I am.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Colin's always like, that could be in a beef jerky commercial.
The Sasquatch.
But no, so they had me on, and they normally record an hour, edit it to 45 minutes. We wound up talking for 3 hours. I called the next day. I go, hey, was that all right? How'd it go? And they were like, great. And I go, when does it come out? And they said, never. And I go,
It's too long.
I go, what do you mean never? And they go, Chuck, we stopped counting F-bombs when you hit 26. And I was like, ooh. He goes, man, we got sponsors. So anyway,
Gotcha.
They said, hey, why don't you do a podcast for us? And I said, sure, happy to. And I recorded a couple of them. And David and Josh are both dear, dear friends. But they were kind of like, well, we may need to listen to that before it goes out. And I was like, hey, fair enough. And I don't want to be in a position.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't have a mothership right now. I plan to be a 13-year-old boy and tell poopy jokes and, fart jokes.
Whatever's funny.
Yeah, whatever's just kind of funny. And so it just made more sense to do it on Digital Wildcatters because I called Colin. I was like, hey, do you want my podcast? And I didn't really even know Colin. I was like, you want my podcast? And he said, yeah. I was like, well, what do I need to do? He said, send me a file. And 48 hours later, it was up. Okay. And there was a rocket ship video out on LinkedIn and stuff. And so that's kind of how it went.
Now, I kind of thought, and I haven't talked to Colin, but Digital Wildcatters kind of feels like a barstool sports for energy. With the conferences you're doing, kind of bringing the fun side to it, like making it interesting and bringing good content together. So it's kind of an interesting process. How much of the business is? I'm not trying to interview you, but I'm just curious. Like you said, you've talked about everything, so I'm just curious. So for your business, are you doing a lot of recruiting as well? I mean, you're bringing so many different people together at these events that it seems like you could easily start going down the path of, companies are trying to find good people. You're attracting good people. You bring that together. Do you do any of that work, or does that happen organically?
So I think if you look at Digital Wildcatters and, the beauty of being the unpaid intern around here.
Yeah.
Although technically my title is Galactic Viceroy. I am the Galactic Viceroy of Digital Wildcatters.
You have a card?
They're printing me a card. Actually, it says Chuck Yates, Galactic Viceroy. And then on the back, it says, I'll call you.
Okay, perfect. No, you need to get one of these. I got this as a gift. It's basically a virtual card, and you can put whatever you want on it, and then they scan your QR code, so you could just have Digital Wildcatters.
Because if you're going to be
Galactic
at
Viceroy.
3 different companies in 6 months, you need that,
you
right?
need to change your card quickly. Exactly. You have to have a plan, and that was the enabler.
After the third company, it's like, I'm just going to stop printing paper.
Don't print it. I don't want to kill trees anymore.
Nice.
It's been a great year.
So
it's actually 4 companies.
Is it really?
If you want to layer one more in, I can talk about it.
I wasn't actually snarky enough.
No.
So Digital Wildcatters, kind of the business model is, you have content generally through podcasts. I think we're publishing 7 podcasts. We're on and off on a newsletter, but that BDE is coming back. So we'll have newsletter, and then you're doing the events. And you're right. The cool thing about the events are we try to do fun. So we have cool topics like
Mhm.
Bitcoin mining merging with the energy business and Fuse. Hey, let's
Yeah.
all get in the same room and quit pissing on each other like we normally
Oh, yeah.
do. Renewable guys, you have to hug an oil and gas guy and vice versa. So we're trying to do all that. But you're right. The key to the content is, and what I really like about Digital Wildcatters is no one's reading a press release. Nobody's reading an investor
Mhm.
presentation. It's, hey, come on, get real. And I think that's what you've kind of seen on our podcasts and at our events is the content
Yep.
pretty genuine stuff and deals with real issues. And so I think that's what draws in the community. Then sort of the long-term vision of Digital Wildcatters is we've got an app called Collide,
Hmm.
which is, if you think about it, is really souped up, very functional Twitter. Because you've
Okay.
used Twitter and
Yeah.
it's impossible, right? Hey, what did Pickering tweet out? And you go
Oh, you
spend
can't.
an hour, you can't ever find it. So the hope is we gravitate our community to Collide.
Okay.
Those are where the follow-up type conversations can have. Hey, David and I were sitting there at Fuse talking about this. We were talking about that. You go find each other in Collide. And long-winded story of answering your question, but hopefully we'll have lots of channels on Collide. If you're a geothermal engineer and you've got a problem, you can go in and there are 200 other geothermal
Yeah, kind of like
engineers.
a Slack almost, where you can
Yeah.
develop channels. You can have specific things you can.
We're
drill
trying to be
down
the
into.
best of
Yeah.
LinkedIn, Twitter, Slack. And to your point with jobs, what jobs would be an obvious fit for
Mhm.
that. And I think what we're going to try to do is take it beyond posting.
Yeah.
And I'll give you just an example of this. We had Toby Rice in shooting some content one night, and I wasn't here that night, but Colin goes, "Hey, you like that guy on Twitter?" And Toby's like, "Oh yeah, great guy, smart and all this." And Colin goes, "Well, he's right there."
Oh,
And it's
yeah.
like, "Oh wow, that's you." And he goes, "By the way, he's going to work for EQT out in the field." And Toby's like, "What?
Oh,
Really?"
that's pretty cool.
So Toby goes scrolling through, picks it up, and Toby's like, "You're not working out in the field. You're production manager in the office because you get it." And that kind of, what I'll say, learnings, if
Mhm.
you will, doesn't show up in a resume, may or may not show up in a job interview,
Yep.
but interaction online. So we're going to try to capture interaction online
Real people
as
stuff.
yeah,
Oh,
so
yeah.
so that it'll say, "Hey David, I know this is crazy. This 22-year-old, and here's the resume," and it doesn't show it, but you've been interacting with that person on Collide and Twitter,
Mhm.
and you think they get it, right? "Oh yeah, they totally get it. Why don't you talk to them about this job?" So
Now I've got a
we're
job placement already. I mean, we need a geologist that wants to do carbon capture and modeling in Ohio, is where our Class 6 team is. And Battelle's there as well. So Carbonvert, that's my most
yeah.
recent job. I'll talk about the 4 jobs.
Are we going to be
and,
there longer than 6 months? If
I,
so, we can talk about
we
it.
can totally.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually Strive was a 3-week job at the
Nice.
end of the day. 3 months of talking from introduction to ending, but a 3-week truly paid assignment. No, but Carbonvert, it's a geologic carbon capture company, but we're really aiming to do more. Founders came out of Solar Tax Equity and out of Shell, doing projects in Canada and actually a bunch of upstream projects as well. Knew Jan Sherman, who was at Shell in the 90s. We're right around the corner from each other when I started working there. And so, put them together actually in 2020. And, really just 2021 actually is whenever Alex reached out to me. But, the whole thought process was, can you actually start moving, forward in that perfect convergence of the oil and gas world and, what's happening around net zero targets. And so many of the climate people are way negative on oil and gas. If you went to 100 of them, 99 and a half would not want to do something that had real industrial side to it.
And
now we're
the
just pulling
half
in the
is
other
just
direction.
drunk and didn't
Yeah,
understand the
exactly. Didn't
question.
realize.
Yeah.
It's like, what's this EOR stand for?
Yeah, right.
But no, it's just an interesting opportunity. And so we think there's this niche. And then, candidly, with Talos, they got lucky. Talos had the right technical expertise to drill wells and operate wells, where the Texas General Land Office was comfortable that Jan knew how to do carbon capture, and Alex had the tax equity understanding of how to really monetize these credits that are going to be created. So they partnered together in a 50-50 project and bid, and then won. And that really established the company. And
so do
and
this
we've
for
walked
my
with-
mom, because my
Yeah.
mom watches this.
Totally.
What actually does that mean? What does carbon capture mean? And what is the actual asset that you guys have?
So
Kind of energy 101, if you will, or
So if
maybe
you
for
think-
mom.
No, if you think oil
kindergarten.
and gas is pulling carbon out of the ground, and I've been
Yep.
doing that for 30 years, carbon capture on the geologic side is putting it back into the same ground.
Okay.
And so putting it into reservoirs where it stays there for millennia. Then you have the layers. And so like that's geologic capture. And that
Okay.
can be pulling it out of the atmosphere, which is what you hear direct air capture. That's super expensive. That can be from emitters, and that can be anything from a renewable natural gas facility that emits 99.9% CO2. You liquefy that, and you've got now green or blue natural gas, like the stuff Archaea is doing. It can be ethanol plants. It can be power plants. It's basically pulling CO2 from emitters and putting it into the ground. The next layer is all the ag business. So that's everything from a project I worked on, job number 4, that no one knows about. I worked with the Jonas Salk Institute, and they have genetically modified and washed plants. So like row crops, sorghum, corn, canola, pennycress, and then also like rangelands, wetlands, and grasslands, where the root systems are deeper, thicker, and have more carbon capture. And so these 100 million plus year old evolved plants are now building carbon capture into soils. And literally it's going to solve, gigatons a year of the 18 gigaton problem of emissions that are incremental.
Because that's what I've always said is God created the
Yeah.
technology to get rid of
No, it's
carbon
simple.
if carbon's actually the
No,
problem.
it's an amazing, and these people are going to win Nobel Prizes. It's called the Harnessing Plants Initiative. They won a TED Audacious Award in 2018, got Bezos funding. They're actually the guy, just coincidentally, I knew Dave Lawrence is heading it up for them. He was an exploration manager at Shell in the 90s when I was there as well. And he's gone on and done a bunch of other things. But that is something that everybody ought to know about. Like you'll hear Suberin at some point in the future. It'll be like THC was a few years ago. And everybody's like, what was that again? Oh, yeah. Cannabis, that's a big deal. Suberin, it's going to be a big deal. And it really is just that emerging market of trying to solve a potential problem. And the reality is, carbon and emissions has value now because the government and companies like Microsoft have said, no, we really do want to have net zero targets. And so it's voluntary and compliance depending upon where you are. And it's just from a size standpoint, I talked a lot about my career in the 90s was one of 2 people hired into Shell in New Orleans, coming out of the 80s where they had way too many people. It got into this great little group. Like origin story wise, I was bitten by the oil bug because I took a $500 one-time petroleum engineering scholarship to Missouri Rolla, and that cast my lot in life. Joined Shell. That wave was a training wave. They got me through my MBA. Good buddy Louis Ropp, who's at Barrow Hanley, left and went to Howard Weil and told me what a financial analyst was. I had no clue what it was. And then I got hired by this great guy, Pierre Connor, who was a drilling manager at Exxon. He left and we joined South Coast Capital. And that was 2000, March of 2000, which was legitimately, other than April of 2020, the lowest point for energy weighting in the market. And so I rode that wave through Pickering Energy Partners in 2005. Dan had me have breakfast with this guy at the St. Regis, and I walked out and sent my associate a message like, who is Bobby Tudor? Because I really had no idea. I was coming over for meetings.
You know who Bobby is? Bobby played basketball at Rice,
yes.
Right? You know that part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
The gym is named Tudor Fieldhouse, right?
It is,
because he cut the money. He is also the career leader in turnovers
At Rice.
At Rice. So only Rice would name their gym.
So uniquely, when I played basketball in high school, one of my good friends actually had to block a shot when I got my first rebound on our own goal. So that's probably the worst turnover that you could ever have, is trying to score. I was just excited, junior varsity, like freshman. I'll never forget it. And buddy, like as I was laying it up, he blocked it.
You were shooting at the wrong basket?
Yes.
Nice.
I was just excited to get a rebound. I was a long snapper and a very temporary basketball player with the name Hike. It's a little ironic in hindsight. But yeah,
actually, the truth be told, I don't know if Bobby's the career leader in turnovers. It's just such a good story that I tell it. And so we'll clip this part of the podcast and put it out on Twitter and LinkedIn. And
I think you would own it if it's true, and we can make it. It's not
exactly.
fake. He probably had a few. I mean,
I'm sure.
At one point in time, he was the leader in one game.
Yeah,
for
there
sure.
we go.
So that we can just craft it.
Well, he was actually there with Ricky Pierce, and I don't know. Pierce? So Ricky Pierce went on to play in the NBA, won Sixth Man of the Year, I want to say a couple of times. Oh, wow. Ricky Pierce, I mean, had a few years where he averaged 22, 23 points a game, and they had to go up against U of H, and that was Phi Slamma Jamma. Mm-hmm. So they were playing Clyde, Akeem, Larry Mishaw, all those guys. And I may get these details a little bit wrong, but I think Rice played in the Southwest Conference tournament. They played U of H in the semis, and somebody had said, if Pierce will score 40, we can beat him. And Pierce scored 37, and we lost by 2.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's a great story.
I mean, I want to say that Rice team was like 18-16, something. So given the annals of Rice basketball, Tudor was actually a pretty good player. I got to give him credit for that.
Yeah. So you're a Rice grad. And you just told me you graduated with Maynard Holt, the other guy that we recruited for that wave of Tudor Pickering Holt. What stories do you know about Maynard?
It's kind of funny because I never believed in the whole Soviet Union and the United States mutual assured destruction. I thought that was me and Maynard. It's true. it's very true. I don't really none of the bad ones I can say, although I do have a picture somewhere.
How long has he been bald?
He had hair in college. I've got a great picture of him actually throwing a keg, and he's got short shorts on.
Oh, very.
And so that's about the most embarrassing thing. But no, Maynard was in college who he is today. Will cry at just anything, right? And hug you, no matter what, and always wants to be your best friend.
We were kindred spirits. We've got this great story of we were both in this weight loss competition together at Tudor Pickering, and we went for a run around Rice. So we met at Rice, and we're kind of looking. I was like, there's a little bit of lightning on the horizon, and legitimately, it was probably the closest time that Tudor Pickering Holt came to losing 2 MDs simultaneously. We were running in like 6 inches of water. It was raining so hard. It was not draining fast enough. And it was legitimately lightning cracking all around us. And we were just laughing our asses off. Like 2 schoolboys just running in the rain, because it was like, what are we doing out here? And then this guy, Josh Martin, came out of nowhere and won the competition. And because of that, he was the first guy that I recruited from Tudor Pickering Holt to join Heikkinen Energy Advisors. Anybody that's that competitive had to be, and he's still at Pickering Energy today running the Insights group. So shout out to Josh. He's done a great job there. So,
oh, that's cool. I think I have Bobby, Maynard, and Dan talked into coming on the podcast and just talking about the founding of Tudor Pickering Holt. And 2 things, obviously. One, it's just a great story.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to make sure it gets captured. But 2, I've become doing this a big believer in oral histories, because I truly believe Dan will say something, oh yeah, and then we did this, and Bobby will be, what? I didn't know we did that. Or Maynard will say, hey, I didn't know we did that.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, when you get 3 people talking about things coming out. So hopefully we'll be able to pull that off. No pressure, Maynard. Maynard seems to be the laggard on that one. Yeah, Dan and Bobby seem to be on board with that. But Maynard, I think, is is hey, let me get a little distance and then we'll do it. So
I think they both left
January.
So it's been not quite a year. No, Maynard and I remember whenever he came in, he was still at Goldman. So it was Tudor Pickering for a brief phase there before Holt joined.
We called him the line, right?
I called
it had
myself
to go Tudor Pickering, and then it had to go Holt.
I changed my last name to Co. So it's like Tudor Pickering Holt and Co.
Oh, there we go.
So that worked. That was on my my business card.
I like that. I'm a named partner too.
Exactly. So I was a named partner in spirit in my own head. But yeah, I sitting there with Maynard one day, and he was telling me about how great Goldman was, and I was like, "Well, why are you even here?" Like, and he started just listing all the reasons that he wanted to come, and I just ended it with, "Well, why aren't you here already then?" And he said that was a tipping point. Like, it was like him just going through that process of walking through why joining Tudor Pickering would be a good thing, tipped him over the line.
Because that's got to be.
It's phenomenal. It was an incredible
Chad
experience.
Michael is in Bobby Tudor's garage.
Yeah, pool house, I think.
Pool house. Yeah,
he's in the pool house.
The pool house.
Yeah.
I like garage better, but pool house.
There's probably some garage storage at the back. Yeah. I mean, it's a nice house.
And so, you got to think, just given how close Bobby and Maynard are, that the phone calls already happened. Hey, here's what we're doing, blah, blah, blah. If not Maynard being part of that. But it did take a while. What, a year or two for him to come over?
No, it was probably, feels like about 9 months.
Okay.
But again, oral history versus, I could look back, but it feels like it was like 9 months of talking. And then he joined probably within a year. But yeah, it was a great group, and Ward Paulzine and Ed Gay and like Bobby just, to his credit, like had it in
David
his head.
Cunningham.
Exactly. Just had the list of like,
and Travis is awesome. Yeah.
No, just like a phenomenally powerful recruiting business.
Mark Meyer went through there. Brad Olson was through there.
It was.
Deanna Zhang was there. Foster was there.
Oh yeah, Foster. Totally.
No, you wound up.
I've still got his book. I still a signed book from Mr. Foster. Founding of Newfield. He actually hired the geologist out of my team at Shell, Bill Holman. Shell was in the middle of this like continuous process improvement, sitting in a room like this, and it's a multidisciplinary team. Bill's our geologist for the Bullwinkle Cougar unit, knows Bullwinkle backwards and forwards, like legitimately at that point, I think it was the biggest producing unit in Shell. And our CPI coach is sitting at the end of the table, really nice lady. And Bill's just been sitting there, and she's like, "Bill, you've been really quiet." And Connie Watson was at the other end of the table. She was our boss. And Bill's like, yeah, I've just been sitting here thinking. And he looks at her and looks at Connie. He's like, "Connie, I quit." And he legitimately walks up in the middle of a 2 hour, and he's like, "I'm going to this company, Newfield." And he left that day. It was the most iconic quitting that I have ever seen.
Oh, that's awesome.
Just like legitimately just like put his stuff down on the table and walked out of the meeting.
I'm out.
And we're all like, that just happened.
That was so baller.
Man, I can't believe that. Hopefully Bill hears this. He'll remember that story. He's on my list of people that taught me a whole lot of stuff. He's a Michigan Tech guy.
And I forget what Foster did at TPH, but I had that right.
He was an advisor.
He was an advisor. Okay,
totally an advisor.
I was like,
he just came in and like just talked. Just spouted knowledge and wisdom. Like it was a really unique process.
So get back to your current gig real quick.
Yeah.
Kind of two things. And I saw these on Twitter this morning. One, I saw your tweet that just says, "Hey, we're not getting rid of hydrocarbons anytime soon. We're going to have to store carbon." Mm-hmm. And then the other tweet I saw was throwing shade at the whole thing that carbon is actually a problem, that's accepted science. Mm-hmm. You got thoughts around any one of those two?
Yeah, carbon, it's this interesting question. I'll answer the first one. So there's a cycle of carbon that just naturally is happening, and it's in the 750 gigatons of cycle grows season to winter season. And obviously the South America and Africa are off, but there's just less land mass. And so you have this little bit of human impact. And so you're trying to measure a small percentage on a big swing. And a friend of mine that works at NASA, they're the entire continent of Africa has no on-ground monitoring of carbon flows. And so it's just one big estimate. And so the reality is you start thinking about, we can't understand cloud physics of like how one cloud works. And so there's this question of, do we really know like how big of a problem we're trying to solve? We know there's a general warming trend. We know that it, happens historically in time. It's ramping faster than it has before. And so like, well, let's try to see, is there a way to tamp that down? And so that's the issue. Like, that's the fundamental question. So the numbers are about 18 gigatons a year. I did a project for the SALT folks and pulled some data together, a bunch of white paper reading. And, so you think about that, if carbon's trading for $10 a megaton, that's a $180 billion market. If it's trading for $400, you start thinking about the size of the tradable market if you're trying to minimize that 18 gigatons a year. And so like the world has decided, I've said this and I tweeted this morning because I was thinking about this podcast, like there's worth and there's trades. And if it doesn't mean that there is 180 billion or multiples of that market size. But if a buyer and a seller say, I want to trade around this at $20 a ton, well, then that is a trade that just happened and there's value around that. And so that's what I'm trying to really talk through is, there's a trading market that's happening on a compliance side and a voluntary side where some companies are going down the pure charismatic carbon route, which is like, I want to have something that looks great for a sustainability report. And some companies are trying to solve their own problems. And that's really what we're trying to do. Like most companies that have a net zero target, know how to go from where they are to 70, 80% of the target. And then there's like this blank of technology. We're going to apply technology to the remainder to get them to the zero. And that happens in 2030, 2040 or whenever. But that first step of going from where they were in 2019, 2020 down to 70% less, that's where we can actually help. The shade part of it and is really around climate is local. And so I think it was Peter Zehan has a great book about, whenever the Illinois basin heated up and Southern Australia were two climates that were effectively the same, big growing basins. The warming of the Illinois basin has actually increased crop yields, has actually increased growing season length, and has actually been a beneficial impact on a big ag region because you have a combination of jet stream wetness and hurricanes. So you get and in the next several years, you may not have a freeze. And so you might actually get to 2 planting seasons in the state of Illinois. That's climate that has actually made Illinois land worth more. South of Mewburn, you've gone drier. And so the issue is now you're having wildfires, and the same change in temperature in 2 different places that had the same agriculturally driven business, world, one went up and one went down. And so that's what I'm trying to get to is there's a plus minus in and around what's happening as the globe warms, and it's regional. And I think that's one of and I think all of the energy transition is regional. Iceland is going to do a great job of having geothermal and hydro, so does Costa Rica. We've got a lot of wind and solar in Texas, but we've got a lot of natural gas too. And so like thinking through these solutions, it's really that going down the 70%, each region needs to have its own play. And what I find is most of politics, most of Twitter, most of these discussions are on the fringes. And the reason I joined Strive Asset Management was, the whole idea is that, people that are running money shouldn't be on the fringes as well. They ought to be in the middle. And that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to draw the BlackRock, State Street, Vanguards that were, enacting shareholder and stakeholder return policies, back towards the middle. And really, I think that's what all conversation needs to be. And so what I'm just saying when I throw shade is...
And what does that middle mean? Does that mean, hey, there are benefits to hydrocarbons?
No, I think it's conversation.
Plastics, et cetera, life expectancy, all that, and we need to counter it? Is that what you mean by the middle? Or
Well, it's the conversation, and what I find you could take any topic, and I take the most controversial topics or like the nth state. Abortion was probably the most controversial topic pre Roe v. Wade. It was like I'm pro life or I'm pro choice, and it was a really simple conversation. Now there's this question of you could take the most pro life person in the world that I know and have a conversation of like, shouldn't we have something for rape or incest? And like, probably. Or, like in Oklahoma, we've got a mutual friend where unfortunately at 15, 16 weeks, they figured out their baby was not developing a brain. Perfect heart rate. They had to leave the state to actually solve their problem. I think all of us would say, well, that's a non-viable fetus. That's unfortunately, do you want to force the mother to carry it to term? Same thing on the pro-choice side. It'd be like, 32 weeks, kind of at that point where do we really need to do that? And what I'm trying to say is the middle is this gray conversation on any topic, and all of the climate issues, all of the oil and gas issues. What I keep coming to is we're not going to change all of human behavior. We're not going to change cement. We're not going to change steel. We're not going to change agriculture. We're not going to change meat. We're not going to change how we drive and fly and power ourselves in plastic. And so if we're not going to change everybody's behavior, well, let's find someone like the Salk Institute that's going to figure out how to modify our ag system where you don't have to change a behavior and the soils get enriched and you have this great idea of harnessing plants. Let's find someone like Carbonvert that's going to figure out a way to put, captured carbon from an emissions source into the ground in a geologic storage. The Northern Lights Project. Like it's this issue of like, if there is a market that has emerged, then there are going to be solutions without having to radically change everyone's behavior. And that's that's my whole thought process.
And basically you, in slightly different words, just made the case that Ruth Bader Ginsburg made against Roe v. Wade. I mean, she was very, very pro-choice, but her take on the whole case was we're going to do exactly what if we rule that, if 9 unelected people rule this, then we're going to have polarization about it. We're going to have huge fighting where if you kind of look at what's happening in the state legislatures
we're legislating it.
and political process, we will get to a point of something more reasonable. So she was actually anti the Roe v. Wade decision, even though politically she agreed with it. And what's interesting is you kind of counter what we saw with abortion in the United States with what happened in Europe. And I'll get these stats somewhat wrong, but generally right. I think there are like 27 countries there. And on average, abortion's legal up to, call it 12 to 14 weeks. After that, it's pretty tough to get. But before that, you can have abortion. And they all did it politically. They did not do it by judicial, we'll call it fiat, even though I don't want to use that language on it. But they didn't have a judicial decree. And so when we think about climate, I mean, I almost feel like I can't ask you right now, hey, we always say that the temperature's up 1.5 points since 1850. If you look back the last 10,000 years, 1850 was like the coldest year in the last 10,000 years. True. Is that maybe why we selected that? And when did man-made carbon actually become an issue? I mean, 1950? Is that what, or something like that? So why are we including these 100 years on it, But
that's really, that's where the market side comes. And that's really what I was trying to get to on the market. Like if Microsoft is deemed that they want to hit some target, then there is a market and a value, even though we may not say your belief or my belief, it may say that doesn't have worth. Like as an investor, you determine what you think something's worth. And then there's trades that happen all day long that are determining what immediately at that point in time, 2 other people have assigned a value. If you decide to participate in that trade, you've now determined what you thought it was worth. And all that I'm trying to point out is the market influences are going to be the things that set price. And so we're in a trend where, there was a time where, if you're a carbon emitter, you thought you're going to get a carbon tax and it'd be a negative. Right now, if you're a carbon emitter, people are coming and saying, hey, we've got a set of government incentives. We've got a set of voluntary buyers. You've got the right attributes, you've got that opportunity. we actually want to take your carbon, liquefy it, and then go put it into a geologic storage site someplace. And they're willing to buy it from you. And that's what we're thinking through. And like that's the value of where the market is going.
No, and I actually appreciate you saying that, because from my vantage point of sitting here being unemployed dude that
You're mostly employed. You may not be paid.
No, Colin walks in and says, "Hey Chuck, can you help me on this one?" Nah, it sounds like a job. Sorry, I'm not going to do it. I need to go back to nap time on the couch. But I don't know that I get to see the insights in there. But I will say this: it's very obvious that the market wants this, and this is not in terms of reduction in CO2 emissions. No question, the market wants it, and that people are willing to pay for it.
I mean, carbon's life. I've also taken that stance. Like, I mean, the majority of us is carbon, nitrogen, some oxygen, a lot of hydrogen and water. But like the reality is we're carbon-based life forms. It's not a negative. There's actually value to it. You know, if you're doing utilization, you know, probably some of the best grow places in Europe, they're actually pumping extra CO2 into their grow buildings. You know, I'm sure they're doing that in cannabis farms. Like there's all sorts of places that you can actually utilize and get value. And that's where the path, you know, diverges. Like there's a little bit of religion to all the fringes. But I do think the silent majority, if they can just understand, like, this is why this is emerging. Here's where things are going. If you do these things, then it actually doesn't disrupt every single part of your transportation system, your plastics, the way you grow, you know, food, the amount of fertilizer you use, the fact that you want to eat meat, the fact that everybody in the world wants to eat meat, the fact that there's 600 million people in the world that don't have electricity. You know, all those things don't have to change. And all you have to do is provide solutions that move you towards that path that is improvement.
So what would really be cool, do we have that in a white paper somewhere?
It's all up here. Like, candidly, that's part of the thing that I think and Carbonvert, the benefit that I think we have is real credibility. And so like we're looking at projects, and we really do believe, and to credit Alex Tiller, he did this on the solar side. You know, in our head is a flow chart of here are the ways that you get to your targets. Here's a way that if you wanted to, in Hawaii, when he was building that, he would explain all the steps. You want to do it yourself? We'll teach you how to do it. We'll walk you through economics. But if you don't want to be the company that does a Class 6 permit and finds the right partners and does the, you know, measurement and verification of it, well, we can do that. But we're happy to teach. And I think that's some of the conversation of like just making it hyper transparent that will help move these things forward. And I think that's where, you know, our little niche will be. You know, there isn't a dominant position, but it's just the education process. And I do think that white paper is clearly something we'll be writing.
Yeah, because I mean, I think at the end of the day, I said this on last week's podcast, and I was just making up numbers. If we can get to this world, because where I think the science is on this is we ignore the rapid rise in temperature at our own peril. I mean, that's unusual. So we should be watching it. Do we know it's man-made CO2? I don't know about that yet. I mean, because you're right. It's a small amount of just what happens in nature with CO2. I mean, we were in an ice age 10,000 years ago, and that had nothing to do with man-made CO2. But
Harold Hamm told me this once, and I tend to think about climate models this way. If your model's broke, and a lot of the historical models you go back, they don't fit with what has actually happened in the last 15 years. You ought to be refining it. And what's happening is more and more people are thinking about this and projects are going forward. The models are getting better. It's like hurricane tracking. You know, right now we've got spaghetti against the wall for this thing that's in the Gulf. But it does get better as you start moving closer and closer. And so I think we have an idea of where things are in the nearer term. It's these long dated trends. You just have a ton of huge variability. And I think that's where what's going to be interesting as you start seeing projects move forward, you know, whether or not that is, you know, there's companies that are doing things in the coasts of Africa. One company that I've talked with, and they're going to actually do the monitoring on site because you have to verify what you're doing. What you're going to get is more data. And then as that data feeds in, you'll have a better understanding. And so it's this this process of everybody wants to know everything all at once right now in almost any topic. Like, here's your solution. And the way I think about it is, as more capital goes in, we'll actually have a better understanding, and then you'll be able to make more informed decisions as we go forward. And that, I think, is where things get exciting.
And my goal on that is I want to spend $5 trillion doing that, not $50 trillion.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the real worry we have. And then there's the libertarian leanings to me that wear the tinfoil hat at night that say we don't need to give governments more power.
Yeah.
So people have always made fun of carbon offsets. I've actually been a fan. I'm like, those are two voluntary private organizations, obviously big bad government sitting around the corner, but
well, what's going to happen?
Do something.
I mean, it's going to be like right now there aren't good futures curves. So how do you hedge? How do you build insurance around these projects if you're buying something? But what will happen is you're going to develop a futures curve for carbon around these voluntary, and so you may not have the bilateral agreement of a trade that's negotiated. You're a buyer, I'm a seller of carbon. We figure out the margin and you buy it for $8 a ton or $12 a ton. But once someone builds a futures to that, the CFTC is going to regulate it. And so you're going to have adjacency regulating the carbon markets, even if it only is a voluntary market in North America. And the reason that you'll have that futures curve generated is you're going to have to ensure if you're buying, hundreds of thousands of tons per year and putting $5, $10, $15 million into those at a minimum, or you do a $400 contract on that as opposed to a 10, you're going to want to have a way to ensure that at least some level, and to have viability of insurance, you'll have a futures. And so that futures market that then emerges, it's what it'll do is then it'll contract the commissions paid between the buyer and the seller. And it's this really like cool, it's like as you get older, you have enough wisdom to see things repeating. I lived through, Hans Myers, who is one of the other key partners at Heikkinen, and, shout out to Hans. He was a bond trader in the 80s before going back to law school. Margins on bond trades went from wide to nothing, and there's only a few bond traders out there. Margins on stocks, we used to get 12 pennies whenever I started in 2000 on some small, cap stocks like PetroQuest. Because there was no buyer. Yeah, there's no buyers and sellers. But we found them, and like we'd get that commission. Now it's mills. And so what's going to happen in all markets is that cost of trade is going to go down. It's happened in real estate. Does everybody still pay 6%? You watch Selling OC, and they're not all getting 6% anymore on the bigger trade dollar amounts. So it's I don't know if you watch Selling OC, but it's a phenomenal show.
No, I haven't watched
a guilty
that
pleasure. Yeah, Dan Pickering had Survivor, but I got into the real estate, Selling California, and all the house hunters and all that stuff. It's been my guilty pleasure for years.
What I totally missed, because it's 20 years old, was CSI. So my youngest daughter and I have picked up CSI, and we've started watching it. And
You're in Vegas still?
Yeah, they're still awesome. In Vegas, and it's funny because we would see these people on the show, and I would go, "Oh, that's got to be the killer." And Kelly's like, "How's that?" And I go, "Because that actor is Dwight Schrute from The Office,
and he's successful now,
and he's like a big deal, so he's got to be the killer." And then you go, "No, that was shot in 2004, and he was Dwight
nobody.
Schrute. Yeah, he was a nobody, so it was a bit part." And
that's awesome.
I say this with love to my friend Jeff Ross, the stand-up comedian. They do an episode where Jeff Ross is a stand-up comedian and gets killed, and I'm like, Jeff has hair. Oh my God, how old is this?
That's awesome.
So
how'd you get into, you do a bunch of music stuff, you've done a bunch of other things as well. What was the emergence of that hobby or passion?
Yeah, so I just like music.
Mm-hmm.
I have no musical talent. I can't sing. You didn't come to the crawfish boil we did.
No, you tried to sing.
So yeah, Lindsay L, the country singer, came and played the crawfish boil, and she let me get on stage and sing Bad Reputation with her. So there are videos of that out on Twitter, and it's just horrific.
That
yeah, I'm just it's miserable. So I can't sing. I can't play an instrument. and all that, but just have always liked music. And what's fun is, some people like to go play golf. Some people like to do this or that. I like to go be a roadie for a musician, carry a guitar around. And, back in my day growing up, Aerosmith, Van Halen, they go trash the hotel room. You get on tour with an artist pretty quick and you figure out, guess what? It's a business now. Lobby calls at 8:00. We got to do this. The radio show interviews at 3:15. I got to do this podcast at this time. It's actually kind of boring. I mean, I'm sure it would be like if a rock star followed around a research analyst. Really? This is what you do?
Yeah, it's exciting. What was your favorite concert? Top two.
Top two. So I remember taking my oldest kiddo, she was 10 years old at the time, to New Orleans to go see Van Halen. And we sat on the front row.
When was that?
This
I might have been at that
this
concert.
was 10 years ago. So let's call it 2011, 2012. They had just gotten back with David Lee Roth. They had released the new album there. And we're on the front row. Charlie has absolutely no clue who Van Halen is, but getting to go to New Orleans with Dad, skipping a day of school, right? So we show up. Two cool things about that concert. Kool and the Gang opened, actually. And everyone in Kool and the Gang thought it was so cool that this little kiddo was sitting on the front row wearing the big ear muffs. And so they all came down and hung out with Charlie, and we were handing Charlie like drumsticks and picks and all that. So that was
amazing.
That was kind of cool. Van Halen comes out, and Dad's, this is Dad's favorite band, right? And
with David Lee Roth, DLR. I mean, it's the real.
I would love to go get a beer with Sammy Hagar, but that's not Van Halen.
I get it.
So anyway, Eddie comes out and just crunches into something. Charlie leans over. Hey, Dad, that guitar player's really good. That's why we're here. That's why we're here.
That's exactly it.
So that was a really cool show. There've been so many of them kind of through history. I think actually seeing 9 Inch Nails play Numbers, the club in Houston that holds about 800. And this was 9 Inch Nails had just been out on tour with David Bowie on Bowie's final tour. Maybe it was the third to the last tour, but it was the final tour, and all this. And so anyway, they played kind of one show at Numbers, and somehow I was able to get a ticket to it. So that was really cool to see them in a small venue. And it was right around the same time too that a startup band, new young band, by the drummer of Nirvana, the Foo Fighters, played Numbers. And I went and saw
Dave Grohl. That's awesome.
I went and saw that show. That was cool. I mean, seeing music in a smaller venue is just really cool.
Yeah, as you were talking about that, I got lucky. I used to, I got it. One of the things that I found in life was saying yes to things tends to lead to you're the guy that says yes to things, and then you get invited to cooler and cooler things. Plus, you got to have a little bit of money.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a lot of money, but you got to have a little bit of money. And so this group of guys out of the East Coast, a couple clients, and then just a bunch of friends, rent a luxury rail car, butler, chef, and go to the Super Bowl most years. And so I went out to San Francisco with them. We rode across the Rockies. Beautiful, beautiful. I didn't go to that Super Bowl game, but we went to a pre-party where Run DMC started. It's the same type of venue, small warehouse. I think it was like Mark Cuban threw it. Then Snoop Dogg was the middle act, and Red Hot Chili Peppers was the main act. And it was like legitimately, like Me to You to Flea, unfortunately, or for him, he was somewhat clothed for this crowd. I mean, I've seen him before. I think it was at Jazz Fest, bare ass. Bass low, so you didn't see full schlong until he started jumping. But the Red Hot Chili Peppers are by far my number one experience.
Oh, that's really cool. I got backstage and it's a horrific for me picture because it was long hair down to my shoulders that I kind of pulled back, so it's mullet like. But I've got a picture with Anthony Kiedis that I got to go
that's awesome.
backstage and say hi to him. I'll just go ahead and be obnoxious because you brought up the money thing. And my audience knows that I used to be rich. Now I'm very poor. So these were back in the rich Chuck days. I used to have a plane. And
What type? I fly.
I had a G200.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
You had a
and-
real plane.
I had a real plane. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And before that, I had a Citation XL.
Okay.
And so what I figured out when it comes to music is if you're the Rolling Stones, if you're U2,
Mm-hmm.
you're flying around from show to show and you're staying at the Four Seasons or the Ritz, right?
Yeah.
If you're anywhere kind of below that level, just given the economics of touring, because it's the only way you can make money these days, it's still low margin business. I
Mhm.
mean,
Interesting.
someone playing the Toyota Center will sell, call it 20,000 tickets at whatever, $75, $100 a ticket. They may only, when you pay all your equipment, pay your road crew, pay your band, they may only make like 20 or 25% of that. And that percent falls dramatically the smaller the venue you
Yeah.
have. So, I mean, you honestly, if you're a band that plays about 7,000 people, it's tough to make money.
Yeah.
Even that. So what I found out with my plane is if you can get to the artist,
And say you want to fly.
you want to fly and you spend the night in the hotel, you don't have to go get in the
bus, yeah.
bus, because that's the way they save money is they get off the stage, they go get in a bus, they sleep in the bus on the
Mhm.
way to the next venue, and then they shower at the venue. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
that's
Didn't
how
know
it
that.
all works. You don't, but if you can get to them and say, spend the night in a hotel, and I'll just fly you to the next city, and they have to do basically back-to-back days because
Mhm.
you rent the equipment whether you use it or not, right?
Yeah.
You rent the bus whether
Right.
you use it or not, the van, whatever. And so if you can get to them, you can be a borderline axe murderer, and they're like, that would be so much better than the
borrowing.
than the bus.
That's awesome.
And so that's kind of how I snuck my way into being a roadie.
Okay.
Was, hey, we'll just take my plane. So yeah,
And so you bought your way to be a roadie.
I bought my way.
That's a
into
good story,
being,
though.
being a roadie. Yeah. So
And
the
I call flying it's like cheap adrenaline. Been flying a Cessna 172R out of Sugar Land. Actually, I've probably flown over your place in Richmond.
well, you might
but,
have
like-
seen. I kept my plane out there.
I probably did.
And so I'm just going to be totally obnoxious. I can't believe I'm doing this, but anyway, my G200 painted it like Eddie Van Halen's guitar.
No shit.
Did you ever see that plane up there?
So you're off to the far right then. Like we were off to the left.
Oh yeah.
I think I did see that plane.
The Great Western.
Yeah.
I think is where
I know exactly. That was your plane.
that was my plane.
This is
'Cause
obnoxious.
I-
You might want to edit this out.
Yeah, whatever. But yeah, you saw that.
Oh shit.
Yeah, that was.
That's amazing.
So I had to get it painted when I bought it, and I was like,
What's the post sale market for a plane like?
it's one of those things that
Is it like
if
buying
you-
a boat? Is
Yeah,
it like
totally.
the
If-
happiest day is the day you buy it? The second happiest day is the day you get rid of it?
Totally. It's the whole thing of if you have to ask how much it costs, you can't afford
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
Because, no, it was funny. They brought me I had a designer that would come up with things, and I was like, man, I want to do something cool. There's no woman in my life to tell me, no, I can't do it. So I'm like,
See
oh,
that
this
Eddie
would be
Van
great.
Halen paint job.
And finally, I told the guy, go stare at Eddie Van Halen's guitar for an hour and then come up with a design. And that's
so
what he came
it's
up
not like they just strap it. That's full painted on.
That's full painted
not
on.
Like
Yeah.
That's not your paste on
Yeah.
strap. That's pretty
No,
cool.
that was my plane. Don't have it anymore. I'm poor now. So
So out of job. Out of
yes.
job.
But God, the Sugar Land Airport's great.
Oh, I mean, it's a cute look. I mean, it's actually pretty easy to fly in and out of. I've got to figure out if I want to actually keep doing it. It's a little bit like once you have kids and you start thinking about like, okay, I've got 3 kids that are 15 and I couldn't fly with all of them in the size plane. And so it's like, do I want to upgrade and think through like a 2-engine plane? Then you got all sorts of different dynamics and it just it blossomed into this decision tree of like, okay, I ought to just stop completely because this is going to get out of hand. I'll have an Eddie Van Halen jet someday. and it'll be the only thing I own. And I'll be just begging people.
Oh, I used to tell the kids, you don't go to college if dad has to sell the plane. I'm
That's
sorry.
awesome.
It's the last
That's
thing
so
that goes. But no,
So I do have one plug. This
All
is
right.
the only plug that I actually have. So 2 of my kids go to the Energy Institute High School. It's a STEM school. HISD, 60% of the kids are Title I. So they are low income, qualify for some assistance. And the school has 800 students of capacity. And because we couldn't recruit through COVID, they're at 680 students. And so, like, when you drive by Bel Air or Lamar and they're building out the high schools and they're overflowing at the seams, like, this is late in the podcast, but if you're interested in a tour and you have any inkling towards interest in science or technology, we've got a great robotics team, got a great, POM squad. It is a great school. It's in the 3rd ward. So, I mean, demographics, it's kind of a, 30, 40% African-American, 30, 40% Latino, and then the rest are kind of Asian and Caucasian. But really trying to get more kids to consider going to school there, because every student is about $4,000 or $5,000 a year that you get from the state. And so that's a $500,000-$600,000 shortfall.
and what's the name of the school?
The Houston, so it's the Energy Institute High School. And I actually think that there's a degree of, like, we've got laser cutters in a work area. If you're a CEO, private equity, if you have an idea of your company wanting to donate, there's a bunch of things that can be done that can improve pulling middle school students in for craft work where they can learn programming, they can learn how to actually run machines, and really get a full exposure to, this great cohort-based training. We're super happy. 2 of our kids go there. 1 goes to DeBakey. I'm a big public school person. I was a public school person all the way through. But yeah, the plug for the Energy Institute High School could really use more kids going there, but really also some corporate sponsorship. It's mainly friends and family at this point.
So I'll plug back. I'm on the board of an entity called YDC, the Youth Development Center. We run an after-school literacy program. We say it's for kids from 1st grade to 8th grade, but it's really kids 1st to about 4th grade.
Yeah.
And we're over in the 5th ward. We've got, I'd have to check because COVID did weird things to the numbers, but we have capacity to have 125 kids in the program. Can I get with you to organize the tour?
Oh, sure. Those kids graduating come by. Like, we do group tours, parent tours. I'm actually I'm the president of the PTO. It's just an interesting process of. I'll probably be it for a couple of years.
Process of elimination.
Yeah, no, it's like everybody take a step back. Like,
what?
Oh, I guess that's me. No, that's great. We just had our first meeting. We'll have our open house. We had it on Wednesday. We're doing in-house a lot more, but yeah, we'll definitely hook up. And like any of the kids that are in that grade level that are going to be, ascending into high school, we'd love to. And Lori, our principal, is incredible. We've got, great staff. But yeah, we can totally get that hooked
and
up.
then the second plug is I would love to figure out, and I don't know what it is. I don't want to say shtick because that has a negative connotation, but there is some educational thing we can do for kids just to say, hey, energy's okay. And somewhat take the narrative back. And here's why I don't think we're that far off, even though most people in our business are so defeatist in terms of, everybody hates us. I don't even want to talk to anyone. I opened some Zoom rooms this summer and just had like college kids come on and say, why didn't you go into the energy business? Or why are you going into the energy business? I want to hear this. And I think 75% of what I heard was kind of what I expected. But these are not deep held beliefs, even though, my kids would vote to get rid of hydrocarbons tomorrow if they could. It's not that deep held. It's actually an uneducated view. And the one kid that told me a story actually gave me gave me hope, and why I think all of us in this industry need to do a lot more of talking, sharing, just proving we're human. Call it a 24-year-old engineer, been out of school a couple of years, went to college in Canada, worked for a Canadian company. He said, Chuck, you want to know what the problem is? He said, my freshman year, Suncor sends an engineer to come talk at my school, 55-year-old white guy, and the title of the presentation is Finding Oil and Gas.
Yep.
20 people show up. Same thing sophomore year. Same thing my junior year. Said my senior year, they send a 27-year-old Indian engineer, and they title the presentation, Utilizing AI to Image the Subsurface. 200 people showed up.
Yeah.
One, just because that sounds cool, said by the end of the guy's talk, there were 400 people in the room. I mean, it was jam-packed. Everybody was texting their friend because the guy just went up there and went, holy shit, this is great. I've never seen this many people. Look at all this cool stuff I'm doing. And just went on and waxed about it. And they wound up recruiting one kid a year, 2 kids a year until that senior year. And they got like 15
Y'all
or 20.
ought to be doing hype videos.
Yeah.
Like we got 2 graduates that are in the alum. I've talked to them. One's at Harvard, one's at Stanford, from the Energy Institute High School. One guy just took his 3rd year off to work at a startup doing machine learning AI work. But what he learned originally kind of in and around Python, he started at, in the robotics class. But yeah, like I almost envision like a pre-football season, start a game, like hype video for the energy industry where you have young people, the people entering the business, y'all could lay that up in a heartbeat.
Colin's gotten on TikTok over about the last 3 months.
I'm not on TikTok.
And I'm not either. Well, I am, but I don't do the TikTok.
I gotcha.
But Colin did a quick little video on just how a drill bit works. It's got over 1 million views.
Oh, that's awesome.
And the comments are great because you get the comments about, oh, you're polluting the environment like you would expect. But you got a lot of people going, never knew that's how that worked. That's really cool. And so
no, I think it's that connection. It's it's those little things that I think matter. And really, I've had this discussion, and I'm gonna have to hop in a second. But if I was gonna boil down carbon capture and what my vision of the world is, I'm gonna snap my finger, and everything that is hydrocarbon related is gonna be net zero. And so we can keep drilling everything that we're doing. We can produce oil. We can produce gas. We're going to produce it in the best places. So it's going to be in the U.S. It's going to be in Canada. Saudi Arabia is pretty clean. Norway is pretty clean. It won't be in Venezuela unless they clean up. It won't be in Africa. It won't be in Russia. But like we can snap our finger and we'll neutralize the amount of carbon that's being emitted from the hydrocarbon industry. And then there's no argument against it. And that's, I think, the key and the message is like, that finger snap at some point in our lives that will have happened. And we can say the oil and gas business can keep doing what it's doing. There's enough people that want to offset it. There's going to be transitions. Electric vehicles are kind of fun to drive. It's a secret. Like they go real fast. But like, there's a degree of all of these like hard changes of the industry that's so fearful, the challenges and the knowledge of how to drill things, how to build facilities, how to, do the geology, do the monitoring. Like it is a layup. And every company ought to be thinking about it as a way to just, change the narrative. And if you tell that, what's interesting is in the 99 out of 100, good friend of mine's in New Orleans, as liberal anti-oil and gas. Candidly, his family made money in the oil and gas sector.
That's usually where they breed them.
But I was like, what if I told you I snapped my finger and everything that you consume has no impact on climate? And it vapor locked him. Like literally his brain kind of froze and he couldn't say, well, I'd be in favor of that.
Yeah.
And that I think is this gradual shift that I think is going to happen through the work of like what we're trying to do and having these conversations.
So I really appreciate you coming on. We'll have you back because I think the 2 things that need to happen for the finger snap are one, the white paper, and then it's incumbent upon folks like us at Digital Wildcatters to put that message out there in multiple different ways so that everybody sees it, from kids down to the gray-haired scientists. So I'll commit that we'll do our part on that if you can give us the roadmap. And then I think secondarily, something that would be really interesting, it would take, hours, so we won't do it here, but it's just how much of that is technology on the come? How much do we have to do? Because I have another big belief that we'll talk about when you come back is we need way more shots on goal with that technology. And in fact, I think that's the best thing we could be doing
that's right.
here is shots on goal. So
cool, man.
appreciate you coming on.
I'm glad we got it together.
Yeah.
Good seeing you.
Good to see you.
All right.